was part of the Western Alliance, stuck to the Western Alliance. And then there was little actually interest in Turkey at the time other than this much. But then when the Cold War ended, then there were a lot of questions about Turkey, the issue of human rights in Turkey, the issue of the political role of the military in Turkey started to be questioned, not only of course in Turkey, but also in the Western world. Then, in the 1990s, the interest between in Europe about Turkey once more changed, and the result was customs union in 1995 with Europe. 1999 came candidacy for the European Union, and 2005 Turkey started accession negotiations because of German and French governments at the time supporting Turkish accession. But unfortunately, in the middle of the first decade of the 21st century, French and German governments changed their minds. The French president at the time, Sarkozy, declared that Turkey has no place in Europe. And the German chancellor said that, well, we will not oppose accession talks, but we are opposed to Turkey joining the EU. It's an open-ended question, etc. And then came changes in Turkey. Turkey started to attract attention from the West because it was seen as a country developing fast, taking important steps towards consolidating a liberal kind of democracy. And all this under the leadership of a post-Islamist government, a government party that had its roots in the Islamist movement in Turkey. And that was also a big surprise for many. Anyway, just as Europe was beginning to have problems in the latter half of the first decade, Turkey seemed to be on the right track, both economically and politically, and it was actually a success story. This leadership of the Justice and Development Party, what happened was Turkey, within the span of 10 years, tripled average income. That's quite a remarkable performance. Of course, there were reforms in the context of the EU accession process, which increasingly took away the political role of the military. The civilian government established control over the military, if not in the constitution and the laws. Practically, effectively, the military withdrew to barracks, and then Turkish foreign policy also attracted a lot of attention because while it stuck to the EU accession on the one hand, it was aiming to establish good relations with all neighbors and in all directions, to the east, to the south, west, and north, and was defending this policy of diplomacy and negotiation instead of conflict and threats of violence leading the foreign policy of the country. So it seemed to be a success story, and because it was such a success, the Turkish electorate rewarded the Justice and Development Party government by increasingly voting in favor of this government. First, in the elections of 2002, it was 34% in favor, and then in 2007, the share of the vote rose to 47%, and in 2011, 50%. And this was, of course, something unheard of in a country where you have some sort of a proportional representation election system, be it with a 10% threshold. But beginning more or less with the third election victory of the Justice and Development Party, some signs of arbitrary and increasingly authoritarian leanings, especially in Mr. Prime Minister's behavior, but also in the general behavior of the government, so that the people have started to question increasingly what is this bend towards authoritarianism and arbitrariness. And we are witnessing in Turkey during the last 3 years at least that the part of the population which questions the merits of this government on an increasing scale. This is all I had to explain why I am going to talk about what went right and what went wrong. So this was just an introduction, be it a long one, but now to start the real part of this talk, I will return to the founding of the Turkish Republic at the end of the First World War. I am sure all of you are aware that before the Turkish Republic, we had the multi-ethnic, multi-linguistic Ottoman Empire for close to 600 years. The Ottoman Empire, the elites of the Ottoman Empire were of Turkish stock. The language of the Ottoman Empire was based on the Turkish language, but the Ottoman Empire was not particularly Turkish. It was, as said, a multicultural, multilinguistic, and multi-religious empire where the Ottoman elites represented all the different peoples of this empire. This empire, of course, had its best times during the 16th century, but started to decline in the 17th century because of various reasons, of course, and finally, because of the growing nationalism among the peoples of the empire, it started to decline fast. And a last attempt was made by the Ottoman Empire to stop and reverse this disintegration and decline by joining the First World War on the side of Germany. The leaders of Turkey at the time hoped that by joining with the Germans, taking part in the German alliance, they would be able to win the war and win back the territories they had lost to separatist movements, particularly in the Balkans, of course, which was actually the central weight of the Ottoman Empire. And at the end of the First World War, Turkey lost, and the Turkish nationalist movement, which came onto the scene at the end of the 19th century, assumed the leadership of the war, which we call Independence War, against partition and invasion of the Ottoman Empire, and the goal was the founding of Turkey, more or less, with its current borders. And the nationalist movement was successful, and the Republic of Turkey was founded in 1923. And the leadership of this independence war, which succeeded in defeating powers that divided and occupied Anatolia, which remained the main territory of the newly organized Turkish state, decided, under the influence mostly of ideas coming from Europe, and especially Central and Eastern Europe, Western Europe also, but mainly European, from the European continent, they decided that they want to establish a nation state. And this nation state was to be led by the ideology of secular Turkish nationalism, which we often refer to as Kemalism, because Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, the leader of the independence war and the leading ideologue of the nationalist movement, was Mustafa Kemal Pasha, an Ottoman Pasha, who later assumed the leadership of the movement. Now, Kemalism, the founding ideology of Turkey, I, among many others, blame for the many imperfections of our political regime in Turkey. Now, I shall remind you that Turkey was a founding member of the Council of Europe in 1949. It joined NATO in 1952, signed under the European Convention of Human Rights in 1954, recognized the jurisdiction of the court in 1990. It became a member of the OECD, the major international organization of industrialized Western and Eastern nations. In 1963, it signed an association treaty with the EEC at the time, and then in 1995, in 1972, there was an additional protocol to the association treatment, which said that Turkey would be a member of the customs union in 22 years, and that materialized in 1995 when Turkey went into customs union with the European Union, and 99 candidacy, 2005 accession negotiations. But despite all this rather impressive record, Turkey, despite the fact that it introduced multi-party politics and a sort of democratic regime in 1950 has not been able to consolidate democracy and instead faces major problems. Why does it happen so? Many of us who have a, let's say, liberal compass to judge what has happened in Turkish Republican history, we blame it on Kemalism on three grounds. Because Kemalist ideology rested on three pillars. First, an extreme form of elitism, a complete distrust of the people. And don't forget that the Kemalists were set out not only to found and establish a Turkish nation state, but they also set out to create a Turkish nation, because prior to the Republic, the Turks were regarded as the uneducated peasants of Anatolia rather than anything else, despite the fact that they were rather well represented in the Ottoman elites. So, with their mission of establishing a Turkish state and a Turkish nation, they used these three basic principles. First, they established this state-dominated kind of polity, where the state comes before the individual rights of citizens. This is our major problem. We're still very much so a state-dominated society, thanks to this founding philosophy. Second principle was uniculturalism. Whereas the population spoke different languages, part of them are being Kurdish, for example, up to 15 to 20% of the population being Kurdish, and a major part of the remaining population having their roots either in Russia or the Balkans. So at the founding stage of this new state, it was a country speaking very different languages. Taking very much France as the example, the Kemalists